All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to wait a second or two to make sure it's streaming over. It looks like it's live. So good morning. My name is Samantha Mirabal. I'm with Melco's application team, and this is our Q&A session. We do these every week for y'all to answer any questions you might have about DesignShop or anything else that's on your mind. I did post yesterday and got quite a few questions for this week, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. Please feel free to type in questions as we go if there's any other things. And if you see me looking off to the side, that's what I'm doing, is trying to keep an eye on the questions. Good morning. All right. So start off with one that we received through email. So, oh, by the way, our email is applications@melco.com, so please email any questions you have at any point, and we'll try to get back, either add them to the Q&A or get back to you. So one of the questions that came in basically was, how do I move text off of the line? So I can only move it right or left when I click on the lettering, and I want to move it up or down. How do I do that? All right, so first off, let me show you that. So if I write, let's write Melco out. All right, and I'm just going to turn off this stuff. All right, so what they're saying is, hey, if I select this letter, so to select that letter, first off, how did I do that? I clicked on what I want to modify. Then you'll see these black X's. They let me adjust each letter individually by clicking on it, and you'll notice it'll put a box around it. And I can move each one individually if I want. All right, but it's only letting it drag left to right. Well, if I want to move up and down, how do we do that? Well, I can hold my control key down, and now I can move it wherever I want. That's only with the control key held on my keyboard. All right. Other things you can do is you can, of course, stretch each letter individually. If you click on the letter again, notice those handles go hollow, which puts you into a rotation mode. So I can rotate, and I can also move these around. So holding control lets me move it up and down. So control pulls it off the baseline. Once you've let go of control, now notice it's back to lock to only moving right to left. Okay, I have to hold control in order to get it to move up and down. That works with any font. All right, so that was the first question of, how do I move the text? I want to move it more than just up, left and right. I want to move it up and down. We had one that I missed on the last Q&A, but it was, hey, I've got this text, and I want to modify it. I'm trying to put it into a large circle, and I think what you're saying is when you save it, it's only saving the expanded and not the text. I've not seen that happen, so I'm not quite sure why that would be, but just to see, I made this thing. All right. So first off, if you've never done circles on big, large text, how would you do that? So if I go create a vector line, and I hold down the walk input and say vector, whenever I do that, down here you'll see there's a circle input tool. All right, so that'll let me draw a circle. If I hold the shift key, it locks it to X and Y. And then I can set the exact size of this down here. So if I select the vector, down at the bottom here, you'll see it says 4.4 by 4.4. I can tell that to be 12. All right, so now I've got a 12-inch circle. Let's make it 12. There. All right, so now I have a 12-inch circle. If I want to put text on a 12-inch circle, I didn't actually have to draw that. Town of... If I double click on it, down here I can tell it to be an arc, and I can tell it to be a radius of 6. The radius of 6 will put it right on the same radius as my 12-inch circle that I'm drawing. All right. Now, if you want to rotate it around, you can always do it by angle this way. So if you know the exact angle, you can type it, and you can use both positive and negative numbers. So remember that, so that you can position it so it's it's crooked. You can also do it visually by dragging the handles around. So I can drag this around, moving it until I get it positioned where I want. So normally what I would do for this is copy paste and then rotate it around. So if you want to change the rotation point, you can also, oops, not do that. Undo. All right, if I select on it, oh, it's only going to let me choose the block because of where the rotation point is. Oh well. All right, you can drag it around and put it where you want. And then here, town of Malabar. Okay, so if you want to fit this into a particular hoop, which is what the first person was trying to do, you know, if you don't have this big square hoop, which would run this perfectly, it's not very evenly positioned, but you get the idea. But what you can do is change the hoop to whatever hoop you want to use. So if you've got the 11 by 12 or 11 by 17 hoop, and then you can select everything and just move it until it's within your hoop. Okay. If you need to do it in smaller hooping, so let's say you only have a small square hoop, like a, I don't know, maybe the 9 by 9 or 7 by 7 magnetic, well, you could do this section of text and then this one. And you just need to have some sort of cross marks or, some sort of way to align it. Okay. I used to have all my Mighty Hoops installed. This was typed in. And my OS and DesignShop, I upgraded the OS, and now some of them are there, some aren't. I need them listed, and nothing seems to work. Okay, from OS, you need to actually go into the hoop setup and turn on the other hoops. So they could be in the MDB in your hoop file, but since they're not checked, they're not going to show up on the right-hand side where you select your hoops. So I don't have OS on this computer, but if you go to your hoop setup and customize hoop list, you'll need to just check on which hoops you actually have. Once they're checked in the OS, now they'll show up. Okay. All right, what other questions were sent in beforehand? All right. There was a whole lot of questions that are all kind of related to start and stop points and stitch outs. So one, how do we do overlap within a fill and things like that? Hello, Escoda. All right. So let's look at start and stops. I drew a bunch of circles. Let's open up my circles. Start stops. All right. So when you draw things, I'll go ahead and to draw a circle with a fill, just in case you don't know how to do that. You click on your custom fill, circle, 1 click, 2 click, hold the shift key, it locks it down, and that will give it a perfect circle. All right. Now, where is the start and stop? Or how do you decide where to place a start and stop? And it really comes down to what are you digitizing? Are you going from one element to another? Do you need to make sure they're connected so that you minimize trim? So there's a little bit of thinking involved. But let's say this is just all we're going to sew. Where should I choose that end? One thing that's always nice to do is to not put it where the last stitch is right on the very end of the element, which is what it'll do here. It'll sew from top and then it'll end right here. It would be to move it in just a little bit, and that helps bury the knot. Okay, so it'll sew, move down a few, and then sew back just a few rows so that the knot gets buried. So that's just one little trick you can do to kind of help. But other than that, you really just think about where are you going with this. Like if I'm going to sew the circle and I'm going to go immediately into a satin stitch around the edge, I wouldn't want to end in the middle of this because then it's going to have to trim and I'm going to go start again and do a circle over there. I would end it somewhere else so that I can go straight into a satin stitch around. Now with the overlap, some of the other things to think about are like down here I drew a circle where it's going to stop right here. I told it to start midway. So how that actually sews out is it does all this. Notice it stopped here, ran to the bottom, and now it's sewing up. Well, that generally, the large distance that it's sewing up towards this, you're going to be prone to moving that fabric and creating a situation where you have gaps or pucker, a lump of fabric in there that's not covered by stitches. So that's happens with your, just pushing things around and how embroidery works. There are a few ways you can deal with that, is move your starts and stops, or you can tell it to overlap the stitches a little bit. So that is found in the properties. So if you go and double click on it, go to properties, go to advanced, right here there's fill overlap lines. So all that number is doing, it defaults to 0. So as a default, you're going to have no set overlap. It's going to show the last row, come back over maybe just that one, depending on how the starts and stops and the rows calculate out. And it's going to stop right there. So if you want to force the issue to make sure you have overlap, you can tell it to do a few, and you'll notice that gets a little bit darker because it's overlapping those rows of stitching. Okay, so you can do a few just to kind of build in some insurance, if you will. All right, so that's what this fill overlap is. Now, if you just position starts and stops on your outsides and, somewhere down here, notice that overlap goes away because you're allowed to sew just in a single direction. Okay. Where's my questions again? Let's see. Oops. Swap. Sorry, I accidentally closed my presentation thing, so now it's blocking my questions. There we go. All right. There was a question that was just typed in. It says, I have DesignShop Pro Plus, and even if I get a design format from another digitizer in an OFM file, I can't do any edits with it. Am I missing something? So it depends. If they're not digitizing specifically in DesignShop, when they give you an OFM, it's just an expanded format. So it's the equivalent of this. If I go open let's see, I have one here on C drive. So if I go to C Designs, I have it saved, this one day saved off as an EXP. So if I open that up, and let's say I digitize this in another software, and when I go to save it as a OFM, file, save as OFM, edit. So I'm just saving it as an OFM. When I open that particular file, it's still all expanded. Yes, it's an OFM, but it's not editable because this had no wireframe data to begin with. It was just a series of points and coordinates showing where all this stuff goes, color changes and whatnot. There is no wireframe. There is no properties that define what that is in the expanded format. You would have to have your digitizer digitize in DesignShop as a native OFM, and then when you get it, it'll come in wireframes. You'll have all the properties and things like that. There are digitizers out there that do it. You just have to look around. Just because they can save something in an OFM, that's the same thing as saving, from as a DST or an EXP or whatever. It's just saving off from whatever the native format of their digitizing software is into an expanded that you can read. Okay, so no, you're not missing something. It just means they're not doing it in DesignShop. They're doing it in another software. Okay. Let's see. Where are my questions? There they are. Okay. So how do we increase overlap lines? We did that one. How to place start and stop for best stitch out. It really depends. The main thing I would say is with your stop point, once you get to the end of something, have it back up a few stitches, go back onto your shape a little bit. That just helps bury the knot and gives you kind of a cleaner look in general. There's a question, does DesignShop automatically tie off stitches? What settings should I be checking? Yeah, tongue-tied there. All right, so does DesignShop automatically do it? Well, it kind of depends on how your settings are. So one way to check your defaults is from a new file, and I always do it from a new because that will show you what your current defaults are. So if you go new, I usually right click on the lettering, and that will bring up my object property box. From here, anything that's set is your current defaults. Okay, so if you go into your tie in and tie off, look here. If all of this is unchecked, then you're not doing any knots by default. Okay, so I would suggest, turning these on. This is the auto trim number. That's, you know, if you've ever noticed text where from one letter to the next there's a little connector stitch between it, this is what's deciding whether that connector stitch stays or if it gets trimmed. So that's 64 points is how long of a line it will leave before it actually trims it. And 64 points is pretty long. That's what, nearly a 0.2, a little over, around a quarter of an inch, if that, something like that. So I don't like that personally. So I like setting it to 20 because 20 points is small enough that if it's 20 points or less, no one's going to notice it anyway. At least I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Some people it still bothers, but it's really a personal preference. You set that as small as necessary, but you know, I would not recommend setting that to like 1, so every single thing trims, because particularly if you're doing tiny things where you're barely moving from one letter to the next. There you go. Cool. They posted a list of digitizers that work in actual OS format for you. All right, so I was saying with the connector stitches, I would avoid trimming after every single thing, because if you don't move far enough, you can actually end up causing more problems and slowing down your stitch time rather than helping. All right, so if you have these set, I set that to always. It's, again, personal preference. Okay. Oh, how you change your defaults is right here. You'll see Save Current Settings to Defaults. So after you've changed whatever it is you want your defaults to be, you can click on that and say Save Defaults Permanently. Okay. That only is for new files. That's your new defaults. If you open up an old file and you're working with that, it's going to have the defaults of whatever that file was created with. So that's where Save Defaults for Current Document. You might have to go back and overwrite defaults on a document that you're editing. All right. Let's see, what else do we have? All right. So make sure you have your tie in and tie off, those boxes checked, and your auto trim set, and you're good to go. How would you set up a circle applique to sew on a store-bought 3.75 inch circle patch on a sweatshirt? First off, not all the store-bought patches are actual true circles, so you're going to want to measure it exactly so that you can make sure you're making the correct size. So, you know, you grab out your measuring tape, measure both top to bottom, left to right, and right here, I'd go select Input, Walk, and do a circle. Hold your Shift key and draw it. Once you have a circle drawn, now you can measure exactly, and let's say your patch is exactly 3.75 inch top wide. Okay, so that's from one side to the other, it's 3.75. And then, but when you measured it from top to bottom, oops, let's turn this off because that keeps your proportions locked. So let's say it was really 3.65. So it's more of a oval. Still looks circle, but if you look at it now, it's not. Now, with that said, you don't want to have it sewed exactly on the edge. You want it to come in a little bit, right? So you can hold your Shift key down, and that scales it and locks proportions, but notice it's going from the corner. So if I undo that, this time hold Shift and Alt, it scales from the center. So you can move it in. I usually just decide how much further in and measure that distance and set them up exactly. But once you have that, you've got a circle. Retrace isn't a bad idea. What retrace will do is it sews around itself once and then it goes back over itself. Okay. Another trick that I've always found is wherever you have your start and stop, rather than having it end exactly there, adding additional length along your circle to have some overlap. Okay, so if I turn off the retrace, let's see, yeah, it's sewing around this way, and then have it go just a little bit further so I have some overlap there. You know, there's just different ways you can do it. Now, how would you set up the file to actually put the patch on? Well, I would copy this, so I did Control-C, Control-V, give that one color. So I would hoop my garment put it on there, sew color 1, hit a hold or applique stop, take the patch, pin it in place, hit start again, have it sew it down for you. All right. The key is to make sure that, not all of them are true rounds. So down here you can get the exact size, top to bottom, left and right, so that you can get it really close to working and exact for you. All right. What other questions did we have? Can I trim out a section of a DST file and change it to another color? Yes, you can. So let's see. This is same as a DST file. So let's say I want my pairs to be different colors. Okay, well, first off, I'd select my expanded. Over here, expanded editing mode. Now I can see my stitches. So let's say I want that first. I'm going to select that point, hit a trim. Now I've got that as an element and this as an element. So I can select this one and give it a different color. Oops, let's make it an actual different color. There we go. All right, so now I've got this one color, my other 3. Again, I'm going to turn off the eyeballs here. That's really just so it's easier for me to see things without a whole bunch of overlap. So I've got these pairs, and again, if I select my expanded, go into the expanded editing mode, select whatever point you want to split it at, and then over here you'll see there's an insert trim. I'm going to click on that. Then I just select whatever I want to change colors to in my project view here and give it another color. All right, so insert trim. I've got very colorful pairs here. Okay. So yes, you can change whatever colors you want in your different, oops, not what I meant to do. Go away. All right. In your DST file. All right. I was trying to do group names to do initials on a monogram with a whole bunch of different monograms. How do we do it with monograms? Okay, so I'm going to go back to DesignShop. I set one up, but I'm going to open what I set up, and I'm also going to recreate it for you so you can see how I did it. Where did I put it? Thought I had it opened. Oops. All right, no problem. Let's see, group names. Okay, so this is a monogram font. So how did I do that? So first off, all right, click on lettering, STM. All right, I double clicked on it. I changed the font. I went to the monogram section and this one. And then notice, see the number 4 off on that code sheet where it's JKL and the number 4 is floating to the bottom right? So that means if I type in the number 4, that's the border, the frame that I'll get on my monogram. So I'm going to select that 3. So I have STM4, apply. Okay, so now I've got my monogram. I'm going to make it larger. This one was 2.5-ish, so I'm going to make this one 2.5, 2.5. Okay, move this one over. So now I've got a monogram set up. So how do I make it a group name? All right, so I, again, select what I want to change, go into the properties. How do you do that? You either double click on it, that's one way, select it, right click, properties, that's another. Over on my project view here, I can double click or right click. It all takes you to the same place, so whatever makes you happy. All right, down here under group names, first off I turn it on. Now I have to add my whatever monogram I'm going to put, and keep in mind I want that same frame on all of them, which that was the number 4. So STM, the number 4, add SRT4, add PPT4, add, etc. All right, so I'm putting my available names. I'd select them and move it all over. We did have a follow-up question from last week that sent in an email that says, when I did that, I've sent them over, but the letters it's not coming out in one file like I'm going to show. That has to do with this output type. Down here, you actually tell it what you want it to do. So if it's only going to show the design once and then the name, okay, you can create separate files. I like doing it this way: design, name, repeat. So if I had like a logo being sewn and then a name, it would literally sew the logo, sew my name, and then it would repeat to the beginning of the logo again. Okay, it's all in one file that way. All right, so I've got 4. I'm telling it to do design, name, repeat. Well, there is no design, so it's just going to be name, repeat multiple times. And I'm going to apply that. All right, so you'll see it's just a lettering element. Well, when you save that, send it to the machine, what you end up getting is this. It loads the machine like that, a whole bunch of stuff on top of each other, and that's what you actually want. There's my first monogram, there's my second, there's my third, there's my fourth, and it'll sit there and keep sewing them. So how would you actually do that in practice? Let's say they're all going to be the same color. When you load it to your machine, you'd set up color 1 and then either program a hold or an applique stop, one of the two. Okay, so you'd literally say color 1 is, let's say, red, and then you'd have a hold. So it would sew color 1. When it got to the hold, it would just stop sewing. All right, at that point, you would take that garment off, put the next one on. So now it's a blank element again, and you would hit start. It would sew the next one. When it got to the hold again, you'd remove it, put a new garment on, sew the third one, and just keep on working your way through them that way. Okay. There was also a question that was, how important is it to digitize for the material? Pretty important. Well, I find, particularly when I send things out, the more information you give to the digitizer, the more you know about what you're going to digitize on or what it's going to sew on, the better you can tailor the sewing for that. So if you know it's going to be on performance wear, you're going to pay more attention to your densities, make sure you have nice edge walks, things like that. Whereas if you're sewing on, I don't know, let's say really heavy twill or cordura, something like that, it has no stretch to it, you can do a little less underlay, for instance, because the material is not going to stretch at all. So you can lighten up on some of your underlays and still get a quality sew out for it. So you can't always overdo things, but there's downsides to that. So I would say it's relatively important to digitize. There's good practices that you should always have in place, but you can tailor things if you know what material it's going on. So you can kind of tweak your underlays, tweak your densities, change how you're going to do your underlays, whether you use fills, edge walks, center walks, if you know more about what it's going on. All right. How do you alter a left front logo for baseball hats? You would need to resequence it. So if Nate has a good video in the digitizing ones, the pre-recorded things that were done for how to use DesignShop. So go check that out. It's in the actual digitizing videos where he shows how to resequence. But essentially what you've got to rethink about it of how you're sewing it out. You want it to go center out, bottom to top, wherever possible. Okay, so it might mean if you have text, you would just go in to edit it and tell it the text to go center out. That one's simple. But let's say you've got fills and other things being built up. You really just think about how it's going to sew and how you would need to best organize all the elements so that it finishes, you do any outlines as you go, and okay, so I'll read that question in a second. And I completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Question popped up. I went to go look at it. Well, so you need to think about your hats, right? So you want to finish as you go. That's a good technique. So let's say you've got words that are outlined. You would not want to sew the entire word and then go back to the beginning and sew all the outlines. Nothing's going to register. you want to finish as you go. So first letter, first outline, second letter, second outline, but then not from left to right, center out. So it really is a matter of selecting your things within DesignShop and resequencing them. And then at times you have to redigitize them, you know, so if I want to rearrange things, I would select and move them. This is a bad example, but to resequence, you would select whatever element it is. Oh, actually I could do it here. All right, so let's look at this green one. It's showing the S, then the T, then the M. Oh, TM are together, and then it does the border. Well, I would want it to show the TM first, so I'm going to drag that to the top. So it's going to show the TM, then the S, and then the border. Okay, that way it goes more center out rather than just left to right. Okay. So it's literally just that. You go through all your different elements and decide how to rearrange it. Okay, so like this one's SCT. Well, I'd want the C first. Then I could do, I'd probably do the T second. CT, and then the S, and then the outline. Okay. So you resequence them as needed to get them to show in the order you need. All right, what else do we have? Okay, someone typed in a question. I'm having trouble figuring out how to use a custom point selection tool, how to draw a circle around points. Where is it? How to draw a circle around points to get them to turn dark. But then when I go to the move selection, I've tried holding shift or control, but as soon as that, they are unselected. Okay, so this is as good a thing to play with as any, right? All right, so custom point selection. First off, I need points to select. Are you talking about working with expanded or wireframes? Well, let's do both. All right, so let me go open something. The one day, let's say. C designs oneday.ofm. All right, so I've got, this is wireframe based. All right, so down here, this is a wireframe. I'm going to go select on that, and you want multiple points selected. So if I select one, it turns black. If I hold the control key and select, I get multiple ones. All right, so it's wireframe based. All right, so that's 4. Control and click is slow, right? So let's do it with the custom point selection. Again, select the shape that you want to. Over here, I've got my custom point, so now I click on that. Let's say I want every other point. So I'm just going to draw around whichever points I want. And then once I'm done, I hit enter. Now you'll see all 4 of those are black. To move them, you need to make sure your cursor is over one of the points. You can't just randomly click over here. So if I click on that point and drag, they'll all move together. Okay, so I can click and drag. I can hit the delete key and all 4 of those will delete. So again, custom point. If I want to move this whole edge, let's say, I would draw a circle around whichever ones I want, hit enter. Now you'll see they all turn black. Left click on one of those points. I did not pick the point. I picked the end stop, which is why they deselected. So one way you can get around that is pay attention to your cursor. If your cursor doesn't look like the type of point you're trying to move, you see how my cursor has the arrow and then the triangle floating to the bottom right? That means I'm over the point. When I'm over the start and stop, see how it's got a floating circle and X below it? If I try to click now, it's going to deselect those points and move along to the start and stop. Whereas here, if I click and drag, because I selected the triangle point, they're all going to move together and it won't deselect. If I click anywhere off the screen, it'll all deselect. All right, cool, that helped. All right, what other questions did I have? All right, we talked about that. So here, is there a way to save custom palettes and have them, bring them into another computer, essentially? So I don't know about the custom keystrokes, so I'll have to get back to you on that one. I do know for the colors, the palettes are saved here. So if you go wherever you have the DesignShop installed, there is a folder that's called color data. Okay, so if I go to color data, down here, if you find ones that are PAL, those are palettes. All these CLR ones are your color trees, your, oh good grief, your thread trees. Wrong words again. You know, like Madeira Polyneon, your thread charts. There we go. CLR is for your thread charts. PAL is what your palettes are. So what would you do if you have multiple computers? You'd say, go to whatever one has the palettes you like, select them, you know, put them on a USB drive, email them to yourself, whatever, and go paste them into that other computer's color data folder. Okay, same thing if you create your own color charts. You know, I created color charts of fabrics I use so that I can simulate applique pieces with fabrics I have in stock. So you can create whatever, name it whatever you want. I named it there so it's grouped near the color charts I use all the time. So it's just, you know, you can use those, and palettes are there, and you can paste them into this folder. All right. Other questions? Let's see. I do have a hard stop in about 5 to 10 minutes, so let's see if we can chunk through the rest. All right, we did that. Oh, this one, the default OS, it should default to whatever you last sewed at. So, for instance, if I go sew at 500 stitches per minute, which is so slow, but anyway, let's say I do that, and I turn off the machine, you know, go away, turn off the software, turn it back on, it will still, that machine will still be sewing at 500 until I change it to something else. So I'm not quite sure what that is. You know, once you do an update, I think it'll reset to whatever, and then you'd have to change it back, but it should hold whatever your last sewing speed was. There was a question on how do you delete previous jobs? Is there a cache that empties automatically, or do I need to do it manually? I'll say I don't do this a lot at all on my machines, and I've got a bunch of them, but here's where it is. So on your computer, make sure you turn off the machine. Actually, you're not deleting the machines folder, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But down here, if you go to C program files, Melco, basically wherever you have the OS installed, in there will be a folder that's called jobs, and there's also one called machines. But the jobs folder is kind of where it caches stuff. So if you delete from there, it'll kind of reset everything. Okay. Any other questions get typed in? I don't see any others typed in. Okay. Well, I hope this was helpful. Please remember to send us your questions. You can, ooh, that's different. You can send them over via you can send them at applications@melco.com. All right, so email them over. If you type into our in any of these Q&As as they're posted on a weekly basis, we'll review those ahead of time and add them to our question list. I do try to review at least the week priors to make sure there was no late-minute questions typed in that got missed. That's how one of these earlier questions was this one. That was actually missed last week, so I added it to this week's. So, you know, send in your questions, and hopefully we can get them answered for you. And like, there is one here I don't know the answer to, so with the custom keystrokes in the editor, that's the accelerator. I don't know where that's stored, so I'll try to find that out. All right. I hope this was helpful for you. Again, my name is Samantha, and I will talk to you next week. And I think we're off the week of Thanksgiving, so Thanksgiving week we won't have any, so there'll be one next week, and then it'll be a little bit. All right. You guys have a good time, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks.